V-2 up on the mountain. You know, if you only come by, you know, we will surrender to you. And after some, you know, convincing, they managed to talk this patrol into believing him and took him down to talk to intelligence, and then went up to the mountain to the chalet to get von Braun and Dornberger and some of the key people.
At Peenemünde on the Baltic coast and Nordhausen in central Germany, the equivalent of a pushing and shoving match broke out among Allied intelligence services. The Peenemünde archive, 14 tons of technical documents hidden in a mine before Germany's collapse, were located by U.S. Army intelligence and trucked out of what had in fact become the British zone of occupation.
In many cases, they're working together, they're forming joint teams, they're sharing material. In other cases, the two sides are stealing from each other. In this case, it appears that they swiped these out from under the noses of the British.
The rationale was to deny the technology to everyone, especially the Soviets, who were viewed with suspicion. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in the Pacific, the brutal fight for Okinawa hastened the creation of Project Overcast, the temporary exploitation of German weapons specialists in the effort against Japan.
There was actually discussion of using V-1s and V-2s to bombard Japan. There was a hope that certain, you know, advanced technologies could be quickly exploited. And then suddenly the war was over and the rationale for Project Overcast was undercut. But it went ahead anyway.
Aboard the USS Missouri, the ink on the instruments of surrender was barely dry when an airplane carrying Wernher von Braun touched down at Fort Bliss, Texas in September 1945. Amid the cactus and sagebrush, the U.S. Army was taking a cram course in ballistic missiles in German.
From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent.
The Russians came in and took some scientists. And they didn't come as soldiers, you know, they came as civilians and kidnapped people. We were really afraid.
To the U.S. government, Soviet intentions far outweighed any questions, legal or otherwise, about the status of German engineers. In March 1946, Project Overcast gave way to Project Paperclip, an expanded program to get more of the precious Germans into the United States. Hans Amtmann, an aeronautical engineer during the war, was among those brought over under the terms of temporary limited military custody.
Members of the Nazi Party who were active members of the Nazi Party or in the SS or in the SA couldn't come over. So they had to be denazified. Some of the top people in the government, I think they closed one eye in some cases.
For 5 years, he conducted important human factors research at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base before pursuing a successful career in the civilian aerospace community.
I think in any situation that you balance the pros and the cons, and that certainly this tremendous expertise of many of the scientists really necessitated or obviated or expedited their being integrated into the American research and design and development effort, and that some of the niceties, if you will, were not always observed.
They knew that the Germans are workers, really workers. I can't express it differently. So serious workers, and so they wanted to get the German influx.
Almost 700 engineers and scientists eventually came to the United States through Overcast and Paperclip. Their influence would be instrumental in developing an advanced American aerospace industry. And therein lies the irony of the spoils of German technology, perhaps best symbolized by the V-2.
the missile technology was so valuable to the Allies after the war, yet not effective for the Germans during it. It's not the case that developing ballistic missiles was useless. It's just that the Germans developed this with the expectation that it would be effective during that war and that it would make a difference during that war, when in fact it was only effective after a much longer time and really only in combination with nuclear warheads. And so in fact the German missile technology was a great achievement and it was very valuable, but not for the Germans.
Battered and exhausted by the war, Germany, like most of Europe, was in ruins. Desperate shortages of labor, machinery, and food pushed the continent close to starvation. The victorious nations pledged to help rebuild the ravaged cities and the economies, but the occupying forces brought more than food or bricks and mortar. They brought hope and democracy.
We've got to teach these Germans to be Democrats. There was a faith on the part of the Westerners that wasn't present with Stalin, that there are good Germans. We just have to find them and bring them forth. So the Western Allies undertook a policy of re-education in Germany. But what they re-educated the German people to was free press. They were astonished, these German journalists, after 12 years of Nazi rule. They went into the classrooms and told teachers, you've got to teach these kids that there are different points of view on this. And there are different interpretations of this or that or the other. And that they have to make up their own minds what they believe. And these teachers were astonished at this. Taking a country that had been for 12 years the most totalitarian country in the world and turning it into a genuine democracy in a fairly short period of time is really something. And it worked. It turned out there really were good Germans.
The soldiers who left home to fight the enemies of freedom returned with memories that they would carry for the rest of their lives. What they had witnessed and experienced in combat could not be left behind on the battlefield.
We had a happy time when we came back. And when we returned, we expected that things would get better for us, that we would live well, like the Western nations. But once we got back home, and after the parade, we learned that life would be no different than it was before we had left.
Diese Dinge bewegen mich bis heute. Und sicherlich bis zum letzten Tag. Man kann das nicht vergessen.
These things are with me to this day, and they will be with me to my last day. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, and all these horrible images come back into my head as if I were there again. Terrible thing, and you have to ask, why did this happen? Why?
Warum?
So many of your friends